The third episode of Surviving Earth is officially out, and so we're going to talk about it. Of course. Now, this episode is titled When the Asteroid Fell, and I bet you can't guess what this episode's about. That's right, the KPG extinction. The mass extinction that occurred 66 million years ago, when a giant asteroid from space, about the size of Mount Everest, smashed into the Earth and wiped out a huge percentage of all life, including every single non-bird dinosaur. It's an extremely famous mass extinction. Most people know about it. Even people who don't have much of an understanding of dinosaurs have heard about this event. And so I'm sure many people are tired of seeing it portrayed. Because it shows up in a lot of documentaries and it shows up in a lot of books. It shows up quite frequently. Even earlier this year in The Dinosaurs on Netflix, we got to see this event play out. But I did quite like the way that it was portrayed right here. Now, it was shown through the eyes of a pair of Nanoxaurus. Nanoxaurus is a type of tyrannosaur that lived further north, like it lived in the cooler part of the globe at the time, during the late Cretaceous period. We follow a male and a female who have just laid eggs and are kind of like existing before the asteroid impact. We follow them before the impact, during the impact, and after the impact. And I thought it was a really good way to show how like the asteroid quickly caused all of these severe environmental changes that affected the animals in a very devastating way. I also liked that we were following Nanoxaurus instead of something like T-Rex, because oftentimes the go-to when showing off the KPG extinction is to do it through the eyes of something like T-Rex or Triceratops or just Hell Creek dinosaurs in general. And dinosaurs that are typically closer, relatively speaking, to the impact site. And so oftentimes you get to see the immediate, like instant effects of the asteroid impact. Not Nanoxaurus. Nanoxaurus was a lot further north, and so even though the asteroid already crashed into the Earth, they don't feel the effects of the asteroid until, a little bit of time has passed. I thought that was a great way to do that, because I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there about how the asteroid impact actually worked. A lot of people think that it was just like, a fireball went around the world and just incinerated every single dinosaur at once, which is obviously not what happened. Of course, the dinosaurs that were close enough to the asteroid got incinerated, but there were a lot of dinosaurs that were further out that were not affected by the initial impact. Instead, they were affected by the environmental changes that followed the impact. And that's exactly what this episode shows. It reaches a point where there's shock waves and earthquakes and things like that. Eventually, the sun is blocked out, putting the Earth into perpetual darkness, thereby causing a lot of the plant life to die out, which then caused a lot of the herbivorous dinosaurs to die out, which then eventually caused a lot of the carnivorous dinosaurs to die out. I thought it was nicely done. I thought that they showed the chain of events in a pretty easy and digestible way. And I think that following it through the eyes of two dinosaurs was a fantastic way to do that. It kind of makes it a little bit more focused, and you can see how this impact affected them primarily, and then you get a sense of how it affected the entire globe and each individual animal. Now, I also want to take a moment to say that I really liked the creature designs in this episode. In the Cretaceous portion, we saw a few animals. Obviously, the main star was Nanoxaurus. I really liked their design. Nanoxaurus is a lesser known tyrannosaur that doesn't show up too frequently, so already it's cool that it's kind of like the main character in this episode. It's got a very nice design, if you ask me. It's got really cool crests on its head, it's got like a bulky body, and it has feathers, of course. It lived in a cooler part of the world, so feathers certainly do make sense on a dinosaur like Nanoxaurus. Now, the feather coloration is certainly a standout, as they are portrayed as more so white, which I'm sure many of you know is not too likely for a predatory animal like that, because the area in which Nanoxaurus lived, it was not, there wasn't snow all year round, so it wouldn't benefit from a white coloration. However, they do explain this in the episode. They mention that it still has its winter coat, because basically we are exiting winter and entering spring, which is pretty accurate, but I'll get to that in a minute. And so because they were just barely exiting winter, they still had yet to lose their winter colors. I thought that was a pretty nice explanation and a pretty cool detail, and I'm just glad that they brought it up. They also mentioned that it was a little bit more difficult for the Nanoxaurus to camouflage because, everything's turning all green right now, and so it really sticks out like a sore thumb. Again, I thought that was a nice detail. It also shows that they're likely slowly transitioning into darker colors for their feathers, something something that would help them blend in just a little bit more. Again, nice details overall. Now, like I mentioned, we are entering the springtime, which is most likely accurate. Some recent studies that were published showed that the asteroid impact likely occurred in the springtime, which is kind of sad because spring is often a happy time. And they just throw an asteroid in the mix. We see some other really cool dinosaurs like dromaeosaurs. Man, I loved their design. Their feathers, the whole skeletal structure, the coloration especially just looked beautiful. There was a little mammal that showed up every so often, kind of like acting as foreshadowing for what's to come after the impact. Also, little birds running around, which, man, they look so good. I loved their design right here. And probably my favorite creature to appear in this episode was Edmontosaurus. Look how gorgeous this design is right here. It might be a little bit outdated because recently, and I mean like extremely recently, there was a paper published that was examining some brand new Edmontosaurus mummies, and it found that they had a really strange crest on their back. Now, obviously that applies to Edmontosaurus annectens, and we don't know if it applies to the other species, but it is possible that they had it too. So this could be outdated, but it's fine. Because, I mean, obviously they were working on the show like before and during that paper was published, and there's no way they can change it that quick. So it's really not a big deal because otherwise this design just looks absolutely gorgeous. Look at those colors. This is probably one of my favorite Edmontosaurus designs that I have ever seen in a documentary. It just looks stunning. There's a whole herd of them, and one detail that I really liked is that there's a bunch of flies just flying around. It feels extremely realistic because if you go near large animals, obviously they attract a lot of bugs, and you have a whole herd of them, so I'm sure there'd be a ton of bugs there. You get the impression that this herd probably smells a little bit strange, you know? So it was just another nice detail. There's some adolescent Nanoxauruses that are running around. They go after the herd at some point. Well, after a juvenile, I believe, in the herd, they're going after the easier prey, which certainly makes sense for a predator. But as that's happening, eventually, like the shock wave from the asteroid impact occurs, which causes the herd to panic, and they all start stampeding, and they end up trampling one of the Nanoxauruses, the juveniles, not the main character, not the male and female we've been following, which was pretty brutal. You know, it's pretty brutal overall. Now, I really liked how they handled the events after the asteroid impact. Again, like I mentioned earlier, they really highlighted the fact that it was more so a chain reaction sort of thing. Once the plants died off, a lot of the herbivorous dinosaurs were struggling. It was even mentioned that the Edmontosauruses, like their instincts were telling them to start heading south because, you know, it's cold. You know, the sun has been blocked out, the temperatures have dropped again. So to them, it feels like it's winter. So they're starting to head where they normally go to when it's wintertime. And unfortunately, once they reach the southern part of the world, not much is going to be different, and so they're going to die off anyway. And so because all of the Edmontosauruses are gone, the Nanoxauruses are losing like their main source of food, and that eventually leads to a point where they are focusing on cannibalism. We see the adolescent Nanoxauruses appear a couple times. They show up when the male adult Nanoxaurus goes off to look for food, leaving behind the female, and they attack her and kill her, which was sad because she was apparently pregnant with eggs and she was sick. She was, you know, already dying. Eventually, of course, the male comes back and he's just like hanging around her skeleton. They're just adding a lot of gut punches here. You know, he stays by her side even though she's just a skeleton. That was sad. And then eventually, of course, there's another time jump, and only one adolescent Nanoxaurus shows up, which implies that his buddy probably is with his ancestors now. And this one's chasing one of those birds, trying to catch it because it's likely hungry. And it was wasting energy, which then led the male Nanoxaurus, the adult, to kill this one and then cannibalize it. It's really showing that these animals are just having to do whatever they can to make sure they get a meal, because meals are really difficult to come by now. And unfortunately, Nanoxaurus goes extinct along with all of the other animals. Now, in the shadows, it was shown that there are some animals that are doing all right in this changing environment. Not great, but they're doing decent enough to keep going. Birds are obviously still doing fine because, you know, a lot of them, like these ground birds, these very small ground birds, they were a bit more like generalists. They were able to eat some things that other animals were not able to focus on, and so they could survive. Same goes for like the little mammals that we're seeing. They're doing just fine, you know, and that's not to say that obviously a lot of mammals went extinct during this impact and a lot of birds went extinct during this impact, but some groups were able to hold on just long enough to, you know, see the end of this apocalypse basically. And and that's really highlighted through the birds and the mammals. Then eventually we jump forward 5 million years into the Cenozoic, and we see an earlier point in the Cenozoic, which is always really cool. You don't ever really see much of that. We see a Plesiodapis, which is a type of primate relative. They call it an early primate, but I don't think it's quite a primate. It's closely related to primates. But aside from that, it looks really nice. It's really cool to see it jumping through the trees and eating fruit and stuff like that. They're highlighting that mammals are doing extremely well in this new world. Of course, the world is now warmer. There's a lot of forests everywhere and an abundance of food. So the Earth has gone to a point where it's pretty much recovered after the asteroid impact. There was also a Cosmodraco, which they call it a crocodile because they say that crocodiles managed to survive into, this new world, so to speak. It's not a true crocodile, Cosmodraco, but it is a cool animal, and it also has a really nice design. And we also see some Titanoides, which are these handsome looking fellows right here. So yeah, this final section mainly aimed to show that, certain lineages are still doing all right after the asteroid impact. Of course, that's been one of the biggest goals of this documentary, is to show you the after effects of the asteroid and how life recovered and like what life looked like after it recovered. Now that all of the dinosaurs went extinct, mammals have a chance to become the dominant land animals for a bit, of course, all the way up until the modern day. So they really highlighted the Titanoides and the Plesiodapis to showcase that fact. So it was pretty good. This was a pretty decent episode. I really do think that they handled the KPG extinction pretty well. In a way that really is digestible for, I'm sure, many people. There was a lot of really nice details in the episode and some things that I really did appreciate. One thing that I haven't mentioned too frequently is some of the dialogue. Some of the dialogue is not the greatest in terms of the narration, and it kind of gives you the wrong impression of certain things. Like, for example, calling Cosmodraco a crocodile when, of course, it's not a crocodile. Rather, it's just a crocodile-like animal, looks similar to a crocodile, I guess. And obviously, still one of my biggest complaints about the way that this show is structured is that it is still made for TV, which means that it is completely edited with commercial breaks in mind. And man, that just really messes with the pacing so badly. And like I said in my first review, it's like there's points where you're just like, you're really getting into the story, something crazy is about to happen, and then like they show you little bits of the crazy thing that's about to happen, and then it cuts to commercial break. You're like, oh, okay, well, shoot. And then you come back and you're ready to see that thing again, but then they have to do a little bit of a recap. They give you some bits of information. That way, if you're somebody who's now just joining the show, they want to make sure that you're caught up to speed. And then you finally get into the good thing. And then they spend a lot of time doing that. And then you get a little bit of extra story and then commercial break. It's just like, again, it's not the fault of like the creators of the show. It has to be designed for TV because it is airing on NBC first. It's not a show that is designed for streaming, which, maybe we've been a little bit spoiled over the years with shows that have been designed for streaming and haven't been designed with commercial breaks in mind, because you get like better pacing overall. But man, it really, really stands out in a show like this. And it's a good show overall. Like, I'm really enjoying a lot of elements about it, but that really does mess with the pacing a little bit. Anyway, that's pretty much all I have for this one. Be sure to let me know what you guys thought of this episode. And until next time, have an awesome day.